We simply cannot allow people to pour into the United States undetected, undocumented, unchecked.
And complete the dang fence.
This bill that we will sign today is not a revolutionary bill.
Cast down your bucket where you are.
We come from France.
And I am, adamantly against illegal immigrants.
They're coming in by the thousands, just unbelievable.
A wall is an immorality.
Who are you rooting for? Those masters of the universe are at it again.
You maniac! You blew it up!
Welcome to Parsing Immigration Policy, the podcast of the Center for Immigration Studies. My name is Mark Krikorian, Executive Director of the Center, and we have with us a special guest today, Václav Klaus, the former Prime Minister and former President of the Czech Republic. He and I were both at a conference recently. I was on a panel talking about immigration. He was addressing other issues, but had expressed an interest to express his views on immigration. So I thought it would be useful to have him come in and talk to us and talk to our listeners about the issue. So, Mr. President, thanks for coming on to our show. And I wanted to start kind of with a general question, because you're an economist, former or maybe former or current economist, and are known as a free market. You support free market economics. And you were, for instance, affiliated for a time after you left office with the Cato Institute. You received the Julian Simon Award, which I didn't know. I read that. And Julian Simon was a well-known supporter of unlimited immigration, open immigration. So what I wanted to maybe kick off with is, how do you reconcile free market economics with limited immigration? Because you're skeptical about immigration. You're not an immigration expansionist. So I just wondered what you thought about that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to discuss this issue with you. First, I think it's a tragic mistake to put together free markets ideology with migration. This is for me missing the point. And very often I read U.S. articles, books, studies in this respect. I'm always shocked how they simplify that issue. For me, I can imagine that it's different in the United States of America, but for us in Europe, it is not normal to migrate. Migration is something exceptional, unusual, very strange in some respect. Someone who migrates is a person who didn't succeed with his life at home. He can have many other problems. I know that it's difficult to explain to the Americans because they are the country of migration and they were created by migration.
Right.
But it was a totally different story because the American continent was empty, whereas the European continent, it is full already for centuries. So it's totally different. So we are shocked by the current migration wave, which exists for a long time, is connected with the totally wrong ideology of multiculturalism. And it was made possible or even greater by famous saying by Angela Merkel, We will do it, wir schaffen das. So we consider migration as a way how to destroy Europe, destroy our nation states, destroy my country. But the first precondition for seriously discussing is, which I use very often in my discussions, when people start to talk about migration, I always interrupt them and ask, do you speak about individual migration or about mass migration? Mm-hmm. This difference is fundamental, and to make any conclusions about migration without differentiating is for me impossible.
But isn't mass migration a collection of many individual migrations? You see what I mean? In other words, what's the difference?
Not only. I'm in economics, my original background really. we have both micro and macroeconomics. So I know that, of course, I know the debates in whether the macroeconomics is a special discipline or not. I even wrote some pieces about that. Nevertheless, I used to be a macroeconomist who published his doctoral dissertation 100 years ago, already in the middle of the 1960s, about inflation, which was a revolutionary topic in the communist country. I was the first one who attacked communism for having repressed inflation, not open inflation very often. Nevertheless, this is my topic, and I used to be a macroeconomist. So with being involved with the radical transformation of the Czech economy, it was more about microeconomics, liberalizing, deregulating, de-subsidizing, especially privatizing. So I became more and more involved in microeconomic issues. Nevertheless, I would always defend the existence of macroeconomics, even as regards migration.
So essentially what you're saying is micro-migration versus macro-migration, in a sense.
I know it's important for some people because I accept individual migration as something which existed in the history of mankind all the time. And I have nothing against having a Chinese restaurant 200 meters from my home here in Prague. So this is not about individual migration on condition they are individuals who migrated because they wanted to assimilate self in the country. So that's crucial.
Right. So one of the things that's been driving both the ideology of migration and the reality of it is the low birth rates in a lot of developed countries. I looked up the total fertility rate of the Czech Republic in the CIA fact book. It has it at 1.73, which for Europe is pretty high, but is still below replacement. And this is a phenomenon in East Asia, in the United States, everywhere. And so my question is, people have said migration is the solution to these lower birth rates. What are your thoughts about that?
No, absolutely nonsense, which I would never accept.
Sure.
Really, of course, the low birth rate in Europe and especially in the Czech Republic. This morning, we discussed in my institute a study written by one of my colleagues about the data published last week in the Czech Republic, as we have the lowest birth rate in the history of modern Czechia.
Wow.
It started. The first statistics became in something like 1780. Which means more than 200 years ago. And this is the lowest birth rate today.
Right.
But returning to, a tragic situation, but the low birth rate is a consequence of something, not the reason for something. So when you started with the birth rate, you almost suggested me to mention my favorite topics about that. I am an economist, really spoiled economist by the economic methodology. And the economists, as you non-economists usually attack us, we are so stupid that we have just two variables, that we know just the supply and demand. Right. So when someone starts to talk about birth rates and very high base rates in Africa and low base rates in Europe, I always would tell them this is the supply side, discussing the supply side. But the reason for the mass migration into Europe is not the supply side, not the supply side in Africa or Asia either. The reason for the demand for migrants is on the demand side, the stupid European politicians asking more and more migrants to come, and the crazy social policy measures motivating migrants to come to Europe, and so on and so on. So again, I consider distinguishing the supply and demand side of the migration issue as another fundamental principle.
Right. But I mean, from the demand side, one of the things that at least drives some of the politics, and this is both in the US and Europe and elsewhere, is a business demand for a larger labor force. That, you know, the labor force is aging. And I just read recently, even Belarus is now importing Pakistani workers to supplement its labor force. And actually, a number of communist countries during the communist period in Eastern Europe, the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia included, imported Vietnamese workers. And I've met in Berlin Angolan and Vietnamese who were left over. So what do countries do about the labor force issue, if not immigration?
There is a general question and a specific about migration in the communist era. No. The communist Comecon at that time, the communist decisions at the general level, they decided to distribute our help or aid, and they decided that one country is responsible for Vietnam, another Central European country is responsible for other countries. So the Czech Republic was somehow expected to help Vietnam on the one hand and Mongolia.
Oh, okay.
Mongolia on the other. It's ridiculous. Many of them came here, they studied here, and they returned home. So I have incredible experience being in Mongolia. No one speaks Mongolese here, and being in Vietnam as prime minister or president, you will discover that half of the delegation sitting on the other side, ex-students in Czechoslovakia who speak perfectly well Czech language. So they are ministers or deputy ministers. So that was another story. It was an irrational or rational activity to divide the countries, ex-communist countries in Asia,
right,
and put them in. So I wouldn't put it together. Excuse me, but I think that it's wrong to put together migration with the import of labor force. This is another fatal mistake in my understanding. My problem is on the demand side, let's say, my problem is that the people in Europe, because of crazy social system, are not motivated to work. Therefore, they don't want to work. And the way how to deal with that problem when the people don't want to work is to import labor force. But this is a consequence of something. Again, it starts here in Europe. I wrote a small book with a colleague of mine in Czech, and it was translated into eight languages, including English, and it's a brief guide to understanding the current migration crisis. So it was published some already 8 years ago, and the point is, and we used a cartoon on the front page. I don't know whether it is visible.
I see. Yes.
On the front page, and there is a boat with migrants, and they are approaching Europe. They are approaching the continent, and there is a big billboard saying Europe all inclusive.
I see. Right.
If you understand what I mean.
Right.
This is almost the summary. In some respect, it's a summary of my book, which was published in many European languages, and I think I can argue in this way.
Right.
I know that Americans don't want to fully take it.
Well, I mean, there's debate within the United States. I mean, it's true we accept immigration as normal, but the question is how much immigration. And so we're on the side of having less immigration, but still, there's always going to be some.
Excuse me, it's methodologically wrong.
How so?
If you on the one hand say that migration it's not normal, then you can't ask how much migration. So I disagree with.
No. We accept migration as normal. In other words, it is something we're always going to have. The question is, do we have a lot of it, or do we have a little bit, and how do we select people? That's kind of our perspective on it.
Selection for me is almost a centrally planned decision. I wouldn't dare to select people in this respect. No. Either you must be consequent. Either you want migration, and in that case, you can't pick up the better ones.
Right. Yeah, no, I actually don't disagree there, because most migration that we would support, that my center would support, is American citizens marrying foreigners, because that is the kind of micro migration, in a sense, individual migration. And in the United States, that's 350 or 400,000 people every year. It's a third or more of our annual immigration is that kind of individual migration, which nobody is against, really, but it's still a lot of people. I don't know, but I assume in the Czech Republic, if someone married a Czech citizen who was, a foreigner, they'd be able to move to the Czechia, right?
It's definitely true, and the problem is the same. Nevertheless, communist countries were closed countries,
right?
Semi-autarchic. So for us to see a foreigner was almost an unusual thing, and to see someone with a different color of face was a rare experience. So in this respect, the Czech Republic is open. In the last 30 years, to open the country was our main transformation program and transformation ambition. Nevertheless, we can, and there are more and more of them in this country. When you walk in Prague, on the main streets in Prague, you will see so many foreigners as in your country. Nevertheless, the proportion of foreigners in the country is still smaller, and many migrants from Asia and Africa still consider the West European countries to be richer and better for migration. And more people in Africa know Paris and Berlin than Prague, probably.
Sure, right.
We are lucky in this respect, but it will not last very long.
Well, also, the Czech Republic is one of the most developed parts of the former communist world. So, I mean, in a sense, you all thought of yourselves as part of the West, really, because you really were in a lot of cultural and political senses. So, I mean, after the fall of communism, especially Americans flocked to Prague to teach English and all of that. I mean, it became a big thing. Now, I assume it's not like that anymore, but did any of those people stay, or were they just sojourners who came and left?
No, many Americans left Prague, especially after the fall of communism, and there were many of them here. But that's a different crowd than the investors or people like that. So most of them came here innocent as regards the education, and they just came here with one knowledge, with one comparative advantage, and it was the knowledge of English. So most of the Americans who came and stayed here became teachers of English. So that's very, very special import into our country. So this is not the case now, and there are more and more foreigners here. As you put it correctly, the Czech Republic has always had the highest GDP per capita among the former communist countries, visibly higher than even such countries as Poland and Hungary. And I think it's just a question of time before the flood of migrants. Don't speak about it. Don't ask them. I don't want to increase the demand for migrants.
I understand. So I'll say to listeners, the Czech Republic is a horrible place. Don't go there. But one thing that drives much of the migration issue, both in the U.S. and in Europe, is our rules regarding asylum, which were set up after World War II. And in Europe in particular, there's the European Convention on Human Rights, which makes it difficult for governments to actually control who comes into their countries and who stays. because they say asylum, they're persecuted, they go in, they end up being in courts making their case for asylum. And even if they lose, nobody is sort of motivated to send them home. How can developed countries deal with this concept of asylum, of political asylum?
Well, first, I consider all kinds of migration, mass migration, as something basically wrong. So I don't differentiate legal and illegal migration. I think it's a wrong concept. And what I would like to differentiate is migrants and refugees. Refugees in political terms, I know what it means. When I was already old enough in the year 1968, some of the Americans may still remember that in 1968, the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact armies invaded Czechoslovakia in August 1968. And my sister, together with her husband, 4 days after the Soviet invasion, left Czechoslovakia, and since that I 10 times stay in Switzerland. So I have a personal experience of that kind. They wouldn't like it to hear it. Nevertheless, I would call them migrants, not refugees. They were not forced to leave. The husband of my sister was an artist, was a doctor, dental artist, who had very good opportunities to work here, and was an excellent dental doctor. So for them, they just wanted to experience the life in the West, and they planned to go to the West even before the occupation. So for me, they are typical migrants. They decided to stay there, and all the pluses and minuses.
Sure,
I would see more minuses than they are ready to accept and to formulate. Nevertheless, I have a personal experience. The same was true with my wife, my wife's sister, a mathematician, one of the first able to play with computers, who left for Great Britain and then Australia, so lives in Australia. So this is for us a personal story. We understand it.
Right. So the thing is, for people, say, from the Middle East or Africa or Afghanistan or what have you, they come and they say they're refugees. Is there any way to actually determine who is and is not a refugee when there are hundreds of thousands or millions of people saying it? In other words, you can't make a decision right away, right? And if you let them stay, then they have families, and then 5 years, 10 years later, when you hear their case in court, it's too late. It's hard to send them home at that point. You see what I mean? In other words, how do you distinguish between refugees and non-refugees?
No. I think the solution of sending somebody home is a wrong one. Simply, I am an advocate of the idea of the nation state.
Mm-hmm.
This is the basis of my thinking. It's not connected with nationalism.
Right.
Nation state is something else. Let's say that your new president uses the same term, and he returned the idea of a nation state into the international politics argumentation, which I consider very, very positive. So I think it's normal to stay in a nation state, a rich one or very poor one. So I think there is no reason to accept that anyone is able to come, that everyone can migrate. No, I would definitely say no. But the people in Africa and Asia are not getting that message.
Mm-hmm.
They are on the contrary getting a different message. You can migrate, and this is the call for disaster.
So, but for instance, let's say you're still running the Czech Republic, and an illegal immigrant from, somewhere, Afghanistan, shows up. What do you do with him? Do you try to determine whether he's a refugee? And if you do, doesn't that...
I must say that till the middle of the last decade, which is just the moment when I stopped being an active politician as a minister of finance, prime minister, president of the parliament, and then president of the country. I must say that till the year, we were lucky that till the middle of the last decade, it was not a real issue. It was the case of it was the problem of individual cases which made it relatively easy to solve. Plus, the migrants really still, most of them had in mind in their eyes at Paris and London and Berlin and not Prague. They were wrong, of course. The life in Prague is better than there. Nevertheless, that made it easier in my time of my political life. I must confess, this is fair to confess.
Right, but the migration crisis started, about 2 years or so after you left office. And in a sense, neither the Czech Republic, nor Hungary, nor Greece, nor anyone else had control over it because Germany caused it. So Angela Merkel, essentially, as you said, we can do it, welcomed everybody. But to get to Germany, they have to go through Hungary and the Czech Republic and Austria and all of these countries. And so, in a sense, it's sort of my question here on the migration crisis is, did Hungary respond appropriately, do you think? In other words, in setting up border controls with Serbia to prevent people from passing through? What were they supposed to do, and what did the Czech Republic do?
Definitely, it was a correct decision made by Prime Minister Orbán, my good friend. But I would return a discussion to another concept, and this is the concept of borders. We have not yet mentioned this idea. I think that the borders represent the fundamental aspect of human life. When you live in your Washington, D.C. and somewhere and have a house, I suppose you have there fence which somehow delineates the place that it's yours, and you maybe close it. And so I remember I attended the first fundamental discussion about that issue at a big well-known conference in Austria. It's a smaller Davos in Albach. It's in the Alps as well, and it was about the borders. And I, to the surprise of many West Europeans, advocated the idea of borders, and everyone argued, please. We expected something totally different. You lived in the communist Czechoslovakia. You had many problems to go abroad because of the borders. I said, no, it was not because of the borders, because it was because of the iron curtain. If you understand what I mean by that. Iron curtain was not a border. It was a mechanism how to block people to move other places of the world. So when I'm advocated the borders, I am not advocated the iron curtain. And the people looked at me, they were surprised that someone from the ex-communist country is defending such an approach. So let's differentiate border from the iron curtain. I have difficulties to explain it even here at home. They are so happy with the possibility to visit all European countries without crossing the borders. And I always tell them, but you don't see the hidden costs of that mechanism. You know, it's nice. It's nice to go from Prague to ski to Austria and to swim into Italy without crossing the borders. And I'm always telling them, please, I would be happy to have a normal borders, and I'm ready to stop at the border, show my passport, and being said, please go ahead. So let's discuss seriously the issue of borders. That's for me the definition for anything.
So if what you're describing is the Schengen Agreement, so-called, where people can move freely, but that presupposes a strong border at the edges of the Schengen system, right? In other words, the question is, where is the border? And Europe's situation now is that there's no border inside the EU, but they're not even really doing a good job of having a border at the edges of the EU. In other words, they have no border either place. So are you saying that the Schengen Agreement and the Schengen arrangement is bad, or that there should be stronger borders in Italy and France and that sort of thing where the EU ends? Do you see what I mean?
I suffered in the communist era for not being able to easily travel inside Europe. But I think that Schengen is a wrong idea. Similarly, I think that the euro is a wrong idea to put together 20 countries, totally heterogeneous countries, and to put them together and to have one exchange rate is a total nonsense. The arguments whether America, the US is a optimal currency zone or not. Of course not. Maybe Alabama would need a different exchange rate than Massachusetts. Okay. Nevertheless, Schengen is wrong and the euro is wrong. So I think it's serious to discuss this openly.
Okay, interesting. So I had last question. We were over our half an hour limit. My one question that led me, this whole discussion prompted in me is, have you met President Trump? Do you know him at all or communicated with him?
No, I am sorry, I haven't met him. I met all the last presidents, starting with Son Ford and so on. I met some of them. With some of them. I had discussions, talk. I officially visited your country in Clinton era, in first Bush and second Bush era, in Obama's era. But after that, I am just an ex-politician, so I haven't met him. But I was just, when I returned. I know we have morning, we have afternoon. When I returned from lunch, and my colleague told me that they called about the possibility of Trump Jr. to visit our institute. So,
interesting.
So that's just the information 2 hours old.
Very good. Well, I hope that works out. And we will look up the book you referred to and put a link, your brief guide to understanding the migration crisis. Are there links online for people to find that? Okay, well, we'll include that in the show notes for the
please,
program.
That would be great.
Okay, well, thank you, President Klaus. I really appreciate your taking the time and talking about migration issues for us. Anything else you would want to add? No, I would like to thank you for this conversation. I enjoyed listening to your presentation in Bratislava at the conference 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago. And I immediately understood that you are dealing with a topic which is my topic of the day also. Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, thank you too. So we'll keep an eye on any work that comes out of your institute. If there's more interesting material on migration, we'll look for it. So thank you again, President Václav Klaus, for talking to us about migration. Thank you. That's it for this week's episode of Parsing Immigration Policy. This is Mark Krikorian. Thank you for listening. Thanks to Brian Griffith, our producer, for making this thing work. And I hope you will tune in next week.